Hello and welcome to another edition of Chiodini's Kitchen, video game recipes made real. Now this week, for the very first time in series history, we're revisiting a video game for a second recipe, partly because the cooking in this particular game is really good, but mainly because I just cannot stop playing The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So last week we made spicy simmered fruit from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and to be honest I kind of thought that would be it really. I figured we'd be on to another game, but since then I've poured hours into Breath of the Wild, and I just love how important cooking is to your success, but also how much fun it makes it seem. So as a result I just couldn't resist doing another Breath of the Wild episode. Hope you like poking bits of food onto pointy bits of metal, because this week we're doing meat and mushroom skewers. Very simple recipe this one, the only vaguely fiddly bit is in sourcing the spices, but to be honest even they shouldn't be that hard to get hold of. So for this recipe you will need some beefsteak, mushrooms, smoked paprika, some dried cumin, salt, pepper, brown sugar and some ground chilli. Today I'll be using green Tabasco, but as a rule cayenne pepper works pretty well and is available from most supermarkets. So step one, let's make a dry rub. Alright, so what is dry rub? Well, dry rub is a slightly upsetting sounding term for a bunch of dried spices you rub into meat before cooking it. So for this one, we're going to get a mixing bowl and add in a big old tablespoon's worth of smoked paprika, a generous tablespoon of ground cumin, just over half a tablespoon of dried green Tabasco. This stuff is pretty punchy. Generous twist of black pepper. A good twist of sea salt. And finally, about a tablespoon of brown sugar. Now we need to take our dry rub ingredients and make sure that they are really mixed in well together so that the flavours are nice and even and we get a nice consistent taste across all of our meat. You may find you've got little rocks of spice from where they've clumped together. You can just break those up with a spoon. You can tell I'm sniffing because I just inhaled a bunch of chilli. Right then, now we've prepared our dry rub, it's time to turn our attention to our beefsteaks, because we're going to cut those up into chunks of roughly the same size, so they'll fit nicely on a skewer. Alright, so now our meat has been nicely cut up, we're going to add it to our bowl of dry rub and rub in the dry rub so it's all nicely evenly coated. Okay, so this is what our dry rubbed meat looks like, and now we're going to leave that for a bit, preferably overnight in the fridge, but for at least 1 hour, or 2, maybe 3? Yeah, 3 hours. 3 hours sounds good. We're going to leave ours for 3 hours. No particular reason, just going to leave it for 3 hours. Alright, so now the switch is out of battery, now that the meat has been properly spiced, it's time to turn our attention to the mushrooms. Just as with the bits of meat, we want these to be a decent size that will fit on the skewer without being massive. So we're just going to go through, and any particularly big ones, like this one, we're going to cut in half. Alright, so now it's time to start building our skewers by taking alternating pieces of meat and mushroom and pushing them onto one of these. Now, if you're a vegetarian, you could always make this recipe by subbing out the meat for halloumi. Although if you're going to do that, I would suggest you use the dry rub ingredients on your mushrooms, maybe coating them with a little bit of oil to help the spices stick. If you're a vegan, you could sub out the meat or the halloumi for some nice big fat olives, which I reckon would work pretty well. Okay, so we've just finished building our skewers, and if you ask me, they look pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is stick them under a grill for about 20 minutes, turning occasionally and checking pretty much constantly, because if you haven't already worked it out, I'm kind of winging this recipe, and so I have no idea of the actual cooking times. Alright, so admittedly that took rather a lot longer than I was anticipating. That was easily 40 minutes, if not more. I wasn't really keeping an eye on the time, but nonetheless, here are our meat and mushroom skewers from Breath of the Wild. There's nothing really left to do now, other than try and put one in my mouth. Alright, so meat and mushroom skewers from Breath of the Wild. Let's see how this goes. Ah, it was kind of interesting. The dry rub kind of forms like a crust on the outside of the meat, which sort of goes firm, which almost makes it seem drier than it really is. But then the mushrooms, because they retain obviously a lot of moisture, they give a kind of really nice counterbalance to it. So all in all, it's quite tasty. It's quite plain, obviously. It's just sort of meant to be campfire fare, but yeah, not half bad. So yeah, those were meat and mushroom skewers from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. If I were to do them again, would I do anything different? The dry rub was kind of overpoweringly cuminy, to be honest. There weren't that many other flavours going on. You were getting the smokiness from the paprika, sure, and the heat from the chilli, but really the overriding note there was cumin. So maybe I'd put in some pounded garlic or something like that. Not really sure, but then that's the beauty of cooking. You just get to play around endlessly with dry rub while making delicious beefy treats, as long as you want, and no one can tell you no. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Chiodini's Kitchen. Thank you very much for watching it, and do keep those recipe suggestions rolling in. Even though I'm kind of stuck on Breath of the Wild at the minute, they really are very, very helpful, and it's helping me discover all sorts of dishes in games I'd never even played, so thank you again very much for that. If you did enjoy this video, please do consider liking and subscribing, but there's no pressure. Either way, thanks for watching, and have a lovely day.